Buddhism and bioethical issues. Welcome back everyone to Mind Podcast. In just the past 50 years, the fields of biology and medicine have advanced more rapidly than in the previous 50 centuries, both in terms of understanding and the ability to manipulate life. This development has also given rise to new ethical issues, collectively known as bioethics. These issues have become increasingly complex, extending beyond specialized domains and presenting broad challenges to society as a whole. The progress in these fields forces us to confront fundamental questions. What is death if resuscitation techniques can extend life almost indefinitely? What is life if we can reconstruct its fundamental elements? What is the individual if genetic experiments can alter human identity? These were the reflections of the late President F. Mitterrand at the inauguration of the National Consultative Ethics Committee for Life Sciences and Health in France in 1983. This committee comprised philosophers, sociologists, legal experts, parliamentarians, religious representatives, family associations, physicians, and biologists. In subsequent years, national ethics committees were established in other countries such as Denmark, Australia, Sweden, Italy, Canada, and Spain. The task of these committees is to assist governments and parliaments in formulating laws related to new biological and medical issues under the pressure of public opinion and current events. For example, the bioethics law enacted on July 29, 1994 in France addresses respect for the human body, genetic research on humans, organ donation and use, assisted reproduction, and prenatal diagnosis, supplementing previous laws on organ transplants, human experimentation, abortion, and therapeutic termination of pregnancy. In advanced societies, conflicts between ethics and law occur frequently. Faced with the pressures of medical and scientific developments and profound societal changes, it is inevitable that bioethics laws worldwide will continue to evolve. As a Buddhist and a scientist regularly confronted with these issues, I cannot avoid posing several questions, such as 1. What attitudes does Buddhism hold toward bioethical issues? 2. How do these attitudes differ from those of revealed religions? 3. How can we find answers to the complex issues of today's society within a teaching that emerged over 2,500 years ago and only saw significant development within the first 1,000 years? In other words, can Buddhism discuss science when science has only existed for about 400 years? If we rely on scriptures as the foundation of Buddhist teachings, I see two ways to answer this dilemma. A. Either we find the answers in the scriptures, or we do not find them. If we find the answers in the scriptures, there would be no problem. However, everyone knows that no matter how hard we try, we cannot find detailed answers in the scriptures. It would require a lot of imagination to guess, like interpreting Nostradamus or Trang Tring's prophecies, because scriptures, like all human constructs, are bound by history and the limitations of time. If we acknowledge that we cannot find these answers in the scriptures, we must courageously rely on the fundamental teachings and the essence of Buddhism to reason out and create appropriate solutions. This is the spirit of adapting the teachings to modern contexts, making Buddhism relevant to our times. To contribute constructively and effectively, I propose the following working principles. Humility, because each person's contribution is small in a challenging, long-term collective effort that requires extensive consultation and input from people in various fields within the framework of a research committee on Buddhist bioethics, for example. Boldness, with a creative spirit, because we, as lay Buddhists, have the responsibility to study and propose a foundation for Buddhist bioethics. Openness, avoiding dogma, prejudice, and rigid principles. Flexibility, ready to reconsider issues, because in Buddhism as in science, no truth is absolute or eternal. Everything is in constant flux. Practicality, drawing lessons from lived experiences in specific cases, not from mere theory. The general context of bioethics. 1. First, we must distinguish between ethics and morality. Morality originates from the Latin word mores, while ethics comes from the Greek word ethos. Both mean customs, but morality is often seen as outdated and rigid, dependent on social context, whereas ethics involves reasoning and critique and is classified by Aristotle as one of the primary branches of philosophy. Ethics encompasses questions and issues that need to be discussed with the clarity and moderation characteristic of ancient Greek thought. 2. Medical ethics is the ethics of physicians, falling within the broader scope of bioethics. 3. Bioethics is a term first used in 1971 in the United States by V.R. Potter, author of the book Bioethics, Bridge to the Future. G. Hatoy defines bioethics as an ensemble of research, expression, and practice, often interdisciplinary, aimed at clarifying or resolving ethical issues arising from the development and application of scientific techniques in biology and medicine. Thus, bioethics cannot exist in a closed society but only in a pluralistic and open one. While medical ethics focuses on human health, bioethics concerns society and nature, i.e. the biological environment. 4. The relationships between ethics, medical duty, and law also need clarification. Law involves punishment, but there is no punishment in ethics. A physician is both a citizen, subject to the law, a health professional, subject to medical duties, and a person who must make individual decisions. Faced with specific cases not covered by law or medical duty, a physician must take personal responsibility before their conscience. This is the domain of ethics. 5. Morality is often divided into two tendencies: deontological morality, based on certain values, and utilitarian morality, based on daily realities which are common in medicine. The core of universal ethics. The core or essence of universal ethics generally encompasses three fundamental principles. 1. The supremacy of human rights. 2. The value of freedom of choice. 3. The necessity of social integration. The supremacy of human rights is enshrined in the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen of 1789 and the French Constitution of 1946. Every person, regardless of race, religion, or ideology, possesses inalienable sacred rights. Since the 1980s, humans have become the central value of bioethics. The standard that can summarize all bioethical considerations is the respect and exaltation of humanity. This value is difficult to define, but a human is not an object, a thing, or a means. A human is something unique and therefore invaluable. Kant made this a principle of his ethics. Act in such a way that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of any other, always at the same time as an end, never merely as a means. That which has a price can be replaced by something of equivalent value, but that which is above all price and therefore admits of no equivalent, that has dignity. According to Hegel, each person should be treated by others as a human being. A complete person with a soul, teeth, bones, spirit and blood, history and sorrow, as a poet once said. According to J. Bernard, the first president of the French National Ethics Committee, a human being is a physiological individual, a being with psychosocial relationships, a subject before the law, but it goes beyond these analyses. It manifests as a value. In short, a human being must be regarded as a supreme value. Regarding life, according to Fagot-Largeaut, there are two opposing views. One emphasizes the sanctity of life, and the other emphasizes the quality of life. These two views stem from two different moral traditions: the deontological tradition according to Kant, and the utilitarian tradition according to J. Stuart Mill. Bioethics often oscillates between these two ethical stances. To maintain balance, one often has to resort to a compromise morality that blends both and seeks to explain on a case-by-case basis. In English-speaking countries, 4 ethical principles for physicians have become universal values. 1. Respect for autonomy. 2. Non-maleficence. 3. Beneficence. And 4. Justice. The perspective of revealed religions. For revealed religions, particularly Christianity, life is sacred and must be absolutely respected because life is given by God and only God has the right to take it back. Human reproduction follows God's command: be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth, the Bible. Therefore, only natural reproduction methods are acceptable. Moreover, aside from changing reproduction methods, humans do not have the right to alter genetics or bodily parts, which are sacred gifts from God. Due to original sin, humans must endure pain and suffering while awaiting salvation by God. Of course, these views, often the official stance of the Roman Catholic Church, are difficult to reconcile with science. However, experience shows that in daily practice, the attitudes of followers and even Christian clergy tend to be more flexible and adaptable. The Buddhist perspective, Buddhism advocates respect for life and non-violence, but does not regard life as an inviolable sacred entity like the revealed religions or as absolutely respected as Jainism. In Buddhism, life and death are part of a vast cycle of birth and death. Death is just a phase, and birth is another phase. Karma in Buddhism refers to conscious actions, not any actions done unintentionally or intentionally, as in Hinduism. Buddhism is fundamentally a path to end suffering, which must be emphasized. Suffering is the main focus of Buddhism, as the Buddha said to his disciples, bhikkhus, whether in the past or now, I only teach about suffering and the cessation of suffering, Majjhima Nikaya. And like the lotus flower that grows out of mud, Buddhism always originates from reality, no matter how ugly that reality might be. Science in Buddhism. It can be said that science and Buddhism meet at several points. Both are based on wisdom, both regard humans as the subject, and both follow a spirit of critique, openness, practicality, and empiricism. Both are merely means to understand the world and oneself. However, while science seeks to understand all that can be known through reason and external phenomena analysis without considering ethics or moral judgments, Buddhism aims at liberation, focusing on the inner self, towards truth, goodness, and beauty, using intuition to achieve an overarching perspective beyond words. In summary, Buddhism and science are neither superior nor inferior to each other, and there is no issue of choosing between the two. They exist on different planes and complement each other. Humans need both science and a path to spiritual guidance. The more science develops, the more it needs to nourish spirituality. Of course, besides Buddhism, there are many other spiritual paths, and open-minded Buddhists will never deny this. Just as there is one moon, but many fingers pointing to the moon. Attitude towards pain. In the case of patients suffering from physical pain, modern medicine has effective pain relievers like morphine and its derivatives. However, in some places, even in advanced countries like France, these are still underused due to various reasons, including religious prejudice. In Western countries, people endure pain as punishment or torment, following the example of Christ, while in Eastern countries, people endure pain as a natural result of fate or a mistaken notion of karma. But recently, the trend against such passive attitudes has become evident, and the French government, for example, has issued notices to hospitals and physicians to use painkillers more widely. Buddhism opposes suffering in all forms, so there is no reason to prevent the use of painkillers. Of course, using strong doses of morphine can make the patient unconscious, thus violating the fifth precept against intoxicants. However, this usually occurs at the end of life, when precepts are no longer the primary concern. Death and euthanasia. The question arises, when a patient with a severe illness reaches the final stage of life, can we help that person die more gently, peacefully, and quickly? Euthanasia, in its origin, means good death and can be defined as an action that causes death or accelerates the process of dying, motivated by compassion for a terminally ill patient, to alleviate their suffering, or more broadly, for another ethical reason, such as severe congenital disabilities in infants. Euthanasia is often divided into two types: active euthanasia, which means intentionally causing death, and passive euthanasia, which means withholding all treatments to allow the patient to die more quickly rather than continuing treatment. This issue is hotly debated in the West, and each euthanasia case stirs public opinion. In most countries, the law prohibits euthanasia, making it an illegal act that can lead to prosecution. The French National Ethics Committee has offered cautious views on this issue, in contrast to the Helping the Dying resolution passed by the European Parliament on April 25, 1991. In some countries, the Netherlands, the United States, the law is generally more lenient towards those who commit euthanasia, usually family members, nurses, or physicians caring for the patient, and the current trend is to impose very light sentences or acquit them. In recent years, the Netherlands has even established relatively simple conditions under which physicians are allowed to perform euthanasia legally. In practice, it must be acknowledged that euthanasia has long been practiced semi-publicly in hospitals. Anyone who has worked in the medical field and treated severe illnesses for a long time knows about the so-called lytic cocktail, has used strong doses of morphine to induce coma, and is familiar with the code NTBR, meaning not to be resuscitated. The law cannot deny these social realities, but it also cannot normalize euthanasia due to the risks of overstepping and abuse. Most revealed religions, such as Christianity, condemn euthanasia because life is considered sacred, and only God has the right to take it away, even from oneself. Buddhism, in my opinion, has a different stance from these religions. As previously mentioned, first, Buddhism views death as merely a phase, a transformation within the broader cycle of birth and death, or conditioned existence. Second, Buddhism respects life and advocates non-killing. However, non-killing is not as absolute as in Jainism, and karma in Buddhism is based on intentional actions, not just any actions as in Hinduism. Bhikkhus, intention is what I call karma. Having intended, one acts by body, speech, or mind. The consequence of killing is to cause suffering to one's own mind, not elsewhere. Killing due to the cause of killing generates fear and hatred right in the present, and generates fear and hatred in the future, making the mind feel suffering and distress. Therefore, we might think that euthanasia, causing a gentle death aimed at reducing the suffering of a terminally ill patient out of compassion, does not contradict the spirit of Buddhism. Upon closer examination, the first case, where 5 monks misunderstood the scriptures and sought to commit suicide, was not euthanasia but a collective suicide attempt. This is no different from recent collective suicides by sects like the Solar Temple, and naturally Buddhism cannot accept that. In the second case, where 6 monks urged a woman to end the life of her terminally ill husband, it is worth reconsidering. Why would 6 monks, whose foundation is compassion and relief from suffering, advocate for that? Perhaps the suffering had reached its peak, and they felt ending his life and suffering was necessary. The third case is even more poignant. An elderly monk suffering from a terminal illness, enduring continuous pain, requested a friend to help him die sooner. We might ask, what is more important? Life is a value, not absolute, since Buddhism sees death as part of the broader cycle of birth and death, or the suffering of a person, which is the most real and fundamental aspect of Buddhism. Could the Buddha condemn someone in extreme suffering and another person acting out of compassion to alleviate that suffering? If we refer to the scriptures, I believe that some Buddhist texts, even those in the Tripitaka, might be suspected of having been edited or added to over time. The orally transmitted teachings were not compiled into the Tripitaka until the Third Buddhist Council, 200 years after the Buddha's passing, and have since been copied many times, making it impossible to avoid some inaccuracies. Lama Anagarika Govinda, who dedicated his life to studying Buddhist scriptures, even exclaimed, 3/4 of Buddhist scriptures are useless. The challenge is discerning which parts are useful and which are not. Perhaps we can only rely on reasoning and self-verification. Buddhist layman Bu Tap suggests that, according to Buddhism, there is a way to avoid euthanasia through ethical practice, creating an open-minded perspective that is not overly attached to worldly matters. With such an attitude, when faced with near-death suffering, each individual can maintain calm and serenity. Saying this is easy, but reality is different. How many can stay calm and serene when death is imminent? How many families do not suffer from prolonged death, watching their loved ones deteriorate day by day, losing their human dignity, all in vain? Not everyone practices their entire life to view death as nothing. Sometimes the quality of the remaining life is more important than life itself. Moreover, we must recognize that euthanasia methods now are vastly different from 2,500 years ago. Back then, euthanasia involved crude and painful methods like knives, clubs, and poison, which were no less painful than natural death. Today, a single injection can bring a gentle death. This does not mean that euthanasia should be treated as a normal practice, and Buddhism advocates euthanasia. Euthanasia should be an exceptional action, reserved for cases where no other option is possible. We cannot outright condemn all acts of euthanasia, nor can we support all acts of euthanasia. We must distinguish between a terminally ill patient in extreme pain requesting someone to help them die quickly, and a nurse deciding to end the lives of patients they deem unworthy of living. Two entirely different scenarios in motivation and intention. In the future, the issue can only be resolved when euthanasia is officially regulated by society, as has been done with abortion, accepted in certain special cases, at the patient's and family's request. With consultation from an ethics committee, consisting of 3 people for example, in each institution or hospital to ensure that euthanasia decisions do not become a burden of conscience on an individual. Supporting the dying person and their family with all compassion does not need to be stated. Buddhism has enough compassion to encourage this. Tibetan Buddhism often uses the Bardo Thodol to help the dying and their families go through this stage peacefully and without fear, and the Tibetan Book of the Dead has been widely disseminated worldwide. Organ transplants. In advanced countries, organ transplants have become a routine treatment for several organs: kidneys, corneas, bone marrow, heart, liver, bones, and are being developed for other organs: lungs, pancreas, limbs, nerves. This is a promising field of medicine, but it also raises several issues. 1. Source of organs. Some organs are taken from deceased individuals, corneas, heart, lungs, while others can be taken from both living and deceased donors, kidneys, liver, bone marrow. In countries like the UK and the US, whenever possible, organs are donated by living individuals, often relatives of the patient. In France, the majority of organs are sourced from deceased individuals. Verification is required to ensure the patient, often a young person who died in an accident, is brain dead while maintaining the body's vital functions through life support until a team of doctors and nurses can harvest the organs and inform the family. 2. Family consent. Currently, in France, 30 to 50% of organ donations do not occur due to a lack of family consent. By law, after death, a person's body does not belong to anyone and cannot be treated as merchandise but can be donated anonymously. Due to a long-standing shortage of organs relative to demand, the Kayave Law 1994 stipulates organs may be taken from a deceased person if they did not oppose organ donation before their death. Despite this, organ shortages persist, leading to a recent addition to the law. Anyone who opposes the removal of their organs after death must register their objection on a national list. If one's name is not on this list, it is assumed they consent to organ donation after death. 3. Organ trade. In France, the trade of human organs is absolutely prohibited. Blood is always donated, with the donor and recipient remaining anonymous to each other. In some poor countries like India and Brazil, people sacrifice their organs for economic reasons, and blood, liver, kidneys, and corneas are traded like commodities, sometimes even exported to advanced countries. This is regrettable, but not as appalling as instances where organs are harvested from executed prisoners for sale, as reported in China by some sources. 4. Buddhist perspective. Regarding organ transplants, I believe Buddhism has no reason to oppose them. If the purpose is to bring health and happiness to patients and their families, Buddhism will certainly support the donation of organs from both living and deceased individuals. When an organ from a deceased person continues to live in another who gains life through transplantation, what could be more aligned with the spirit of compassion, selflessness, and the principle of dependent origination in Buddhism? And because the spirit of compassionate giving implies no self-interest, we can assert that Buddhism will never advocate the sale of organs, whether the organs are taken from a volunteer for economic reasons or forcibly harvested from prisoners. Contraception. It can be said that one of the greatest dangers facing humanity in the coming decades is the rapid population growth. From 3 billion people in 1960, the global population has doubled, reaching nearly 6 billion today. The growth rate is 100 million people per year, equivalent to the combined populations of Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos added each year to the planet. Moreover, this population increase is uneven, mainly occurring in underdeveloped, impoverished regions. It is a vicious cycle and a source of many other issues: disease, illiteracy, social problems, violence, environmental pollution, etc. Therefore, birth control contraception is an immensely important matter that cannot be ignored and is a duty for everyone who is responsible and concerned about the future of humanity, especially when contraceptive methods have become effective and widespread today: condoms, birth control pills, IUDs. Revealed religions such as Christianity oppose contraception because for them, life is a sacred gift from God, as the Bible says, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth." In contrast, Buddhism places life within the concepts of impermanence, selflessness, and dependent origination, so it does not regard procreation as an inviolable tenet. Because of this, Buddhism has no reason to oppose contraception. If procreation leads to poverty and disease, which are sources of suffering, Buddhism, as a path to end suffering, naturally advocates for birth control. On this issue, the Dalai Lama's stance is very clear. Not only should birth control be advocated, but this important matter must also be promoted. Abortion. Before discussing this complex issue, we must analyze some scientific and social aspects. 1. Status of the fetus. One of the initial difficulties encountered, and the main reason for conflicting views, is defining when a fetus becomes a human being and must be respected as such. Is it from the moment the sperm meets the egg to become the first cell? When the egg implants in the uterus, the 7th day? When it can no longer split into twins, the 14th day? At the end of organ formation, the 3rd month? At birth? Or sometime after birth? Chinese uses the term embryo for a 1-month-old fetus and fetus for a 3-month-old one. According to the Talmud Jewish, the fetus begins to have a soul 40 days after conception, and according to Islam, it is from 40 to 120 days after conception. To avoid this contentious issue, the French National Ethics Committee has proposed defining a fetus as a being with the potential to become a human or a person to be. According to R. Friedman, who along with J. Testard was the first in France to succeed in IVF, the critical factor is the attitude of the father and especially the mother towards the fetus. A fetus is a human being when there is a parental project. 2. Abortion, a social event. In France, before the law permitting abortion, 1975, there was a law prohibiting it, 1960, and abortion was considered criminal homicide, criminal abortion. Despite this, there were approximately 250,000 abortions annually and 300 deaths due to unsafe, clandestine abortions. In developing countries today, 1 pregnant woman dies every minute, and 1 in 4 dies from unsafe abortion. The Weil Law, enacted on January 17, 1975, allows a woman in distress to request a physician to terminate the pregnancy before the 10th week in a public or private hospital, 1 week after the request. Before this, Article 1 stated, "The law guarantees respect for every human being from the beginning of life." This principle can only be overridden when necessary and under conditions specified by this law. The term used is voluntary interruption of pregnancy, IVG, alongside therapeutic interruption of pregnancy, ITG. Therapeutic abortion can be performed at any time if certified by 2 physicians after examination and discussion that continuing the pregnancy would seriously threaten the mother's health, or if the child would be born with an incurable serious illness. As a result, today in France, almost no one dies from abortion. Moreover, the number of IVGs has not increased in 15 years, nor has it changed since the cost has been covered by health insurance. The 10-week pregnancy limit remains an issue, as some women still travel to the UK or the Netherlands, where abortion is allowed up to 20 and sometimes 24 weeks. In 1982, Professor E. Beaulieu developed RU-486, a drug that counteracts progesterone and induces abortion from the 8th day. Despite some future uncertainties, this drug has proven effective with few complications. In France, RU-486 is only permitted within the framework of the 1975 law. It is likely that future drugs will have earlier effects, and these abortion drugs will replace traditional abortion methods. 3. Buddhism on abortion. Recall that Buddhism advocates non-killing, the first precept, but does not place life as something sacred and inviolable as in revealed religions. Buddhism is fundamentally a path to end suffering. If abortion leads to suffering, even if only due to lifelong regret, Buddhism naturally does not advocate it. But if abortion can alleviate the suffering of a woman who cannot keep the pregnancy safely and hygienically, then abortion is the lesser suffering solution. The ethical issue here is a classic dilemma, requiring a choice between 2 paths, taking the one that causes the least suffering, following a compromised morality based on reality. And the reality is that regardless, there will be many cases of abortion, a social event that cannot be avoided or denied. Clandestine abortion, treated as a crime under unsanitary conditions, leads to many complications and deaths, causing grief to countless families, as experience has shown. Buddhism is a path of compassion and relief from suffering, a practical path that never refuses a less painful method because of rigid principles. Therefore, I believe that unlike revealed religions like Christianity, Buddhism does not oppose voluntary interruption of pregnancy as defined by the Wheel Law. The important thing is to let the pregnant woman choose. It is both her responsibility and her right over her body and her parental project. Of course, the best solution is to prevent conception through contraception, and everyone agrees on that. Abortion is only a last resort, a last-ditch effort. Regarding therapeutic interruption of pregnancy after prenatal diagnosis, I think it is not an issue for Buddhists. If the goal is to save the mother's life or to prevent the family from enduring a severely disabled child with no hope of survival, there is no reason to oppose this therapeutic goal. In cases where it is difficult to decide because the child's condition does not threaten the mother's or its own life, the family should make the decision with the physicians within the framework of the law. Artificial insemination and in vitro fertilization. Artificial insemination, which involves introducing sperm from a donor anonymously into a woman's uterus, has been practiced for a long time and does not raise significant issues, aside from psychological concerns regarding the biological father's identity. With in vitro fertilization with embryo transfer, IVF-ET, biology has taken a further step. Since Louise Brown's birth in 1978 in the UK and Amandine's birth in 1982 in France, thousands of children have been born this way, bringing happiness to many infertile couples. Recently, success rates have increased by injecting sperm directly into the egg. However, issues arise when the womb of a surrogate mother is needed. Should this be considered a woman volunteering to carry a pregnancy to term, or a person renting her womb and being paid for it? For some religions that consider life as a sacred gift from God, artificial insemination, contrary to natural conception, and in vitro fertilization, which is even less natural, are unacceptable. For Buddhism, conception is the result of the meeting of three factors: the father's sperm, the mother's egg, and the rebirth consciousness, Padasandhi Vijnana, that appears at the time of conception. This rebirth consciousness is considered a seed, bija, combined with the power of karma and craving, tanha, especially the craving for existence, bhava tanha, which leads to the beginning of a new life. Apart from the distinctive feature of rebirth consciousness, Buddhism does not differ from science. Buddhism acknowledges various forms of birth for beings, so in principle I believe it does not oppose these two methods. Whether it is inside the mother's body or in a test tube, the main point is the parent's desire to have a child. It can be said that a scientist's attitude, such as R. Friedman, is very close to Buddhism. He believes that the important thing is the parent's intention, which he calls the parental project, projet parental. From his medical experience, what turns a fetus into a human being, moving from potential to actuality, is this parental project. In Buddhism, the key factor is the force of karma, the craving for existence, which is an intentional action or desire. Genetics 1. Prenatal diagnosis. Today, with advances in imaging diagnostics like ultrasound, molecular biology, and genetics, it is possible to detect many congenital diseases before birth. This detection leads to one of two solutions: treatment, where possible, either in the womb or after birth; therapeutic abortion in severe cases. Naturally, some cases are difficult to resolve. At such times, we must rely on basic principles. Respect the parent's wishes. For example, if a severe case like trisomy 21 is diagnosed and the parents wish to keep the pregnancy, their decision must be respected. Conversely, parents cannot decide on an abortion for minor anomalies like a cleft lip, missing toe, or worse, just because of personal preference for a boy or girl. These issues can only be resolved on a case-by-case basis between a medical team and the parents. 2. Eugenics. The term eugenics was first used by F. Galton, Darwin's cousin, in 1883 to designate the science of improving the genetic quality of the human race by studying the factors that can increase or decrease the genetic quality of future generations, both physically and mentally. According to G. Hatois and M. H. Parizeau, authors of Dictionary of Bioethics, it is essential to distinguish between eugenics and eugenism. Eugenics includes techniques to improve the genetic heritage by helping a gene develop or preventing it from doing so. Eugenism encompasses projects aimed at influencing heredity to enhance the human race. Eugenics is a scientific technical discipline, whereas eugenism is a political, social, and ideological stance. According to P.A. Taguieff, we should not excessively equate eugenics with dictatorship, discrimination, and genocide. To have a clear understanding, one must distinguish between eugenics as an idea, eugenic intent, eugenic action, and eugenism as a political ideology or program of action. The Nazi movement's atrocities belong to this latter category. In 1939, Hitler ordered the initiation of a vast eugenic program by exterminating millions of people with gas, starting with unworthy, disabled individuals and eventually all Jews. The desire for eugenics can only be acceptable in preventive measures. In this context, we must differentiate between avoiding the worst, negative minimal eugenics, and the vague aspiration for a better state. For example, genetic counseling, prenatal diagnosis, and therapeutic abortion during the prenatal period all fall within the realm of gene correction and negative eugenic intent. All these actions are personal and not compulsory. They become eugenism when applied on a large scale with the delusion of improving humanity. In the past 2 decades, thanks to the molecular biology revolution, genetic understanding has advanced rapidly, particularly with the global project to study the human genome. This colossal research effort will lead to a deeper understanding of the origins of diseases and, furthermore, to the prevention and treatment of many currently unresolved diseases. Genetic medicine, though in its infancy, already raises complex and challenging bioethical issues. The Bioethics Law of July 29, 1994, only permits genetic testing for medical and research purposes, and the National Consultative Ethics Committee has provided its views and advice on the matter. Thorough explanations to the individual, testing only with the individual's consent, confidentiality of results, and respecting the individual's decision. 3. Genetic engineering. Genetic engineering is the field of research aiming to alter genetics by manipulating genes. The ability to modify genetics has already been applied to plants and animals, selecting and altering corn, tomatoes, horses, cattle. In 1974, a conference on genetic engineering was held in Asilomar, a small city in western USA. For the first time, people felt dizzy with the responsibility, and scientists at the conference decided to impose a 2-year moratorium to allow time for reflection and to establish more stringent safety conditions. Today, many pharmaceutical companies worldwide are pushing forward genetic modifications in plants and animals, creating transgenic species, such as Escherichia coli bacteria that can produce proteins for treating diseases like insulin, tobacco plants that can produce hemoglobin or lipase enzymes, or cows, sheep, and goats producing milk with proteins like alpha-1 antitrypsin, antithrombin 3, or factor 9 for blood clotting. These are significant scientific advancements, but it must be said that all these studies are driven by a clear commercial goal. Recently, the world was shocked by research results from Scotland on cloning, where a sheep was cloned from the nucleus of a mammary cell of a parent sheep, resulting in an identical genome. Subsequently, other animals were cloned similarly, notably the sheep Dolly, whose milk contains a protein for treating human diseases. From a scientific standpoint, this is a promising achievement. However, the potential for human cloning poses significant dangers, leading world leaders like President Chirac and Clinton to call for a global ban on all human cloning experiments. As F. Jacobs said, this is merely a delusion of human immortality, an attempt to replicate oneself to continue existing. Human cloning has no real benefit, as natural occurrences of twins, triplets, etc. are already natural clones. Experience shows that even in true twins, there are differences in physical and personality traits, indicating that genes are not everything. In other words, a human is not just a collection of genes, but a much more complex synthesis influenced by education, society, and more. In terms of evolution, cloning is a step backward, as evolution requires genetic diversity and change through sexual reproduction. 4. Buddhism and genetics. What stance might Buddhism take on genetic issues? During the time of the Buddha, it was vaguely known that life resulted from the meeting of a father's sperm and a mother's egg, along with the rebirth consciousness, transferring parents' traits to offspring. However, the detailed complexities of genetics were unknown, and no one could imagine that one day humans could alter genetics. If the Buddha were alive today, with modern scientific understanding of genetics, how might he react? This is hypothetical, but I conjecture that the Buddha would never oppose medical methods that reduce human suffering. Regarding prenatal diagnosis, he would not oppose prenatal diagnosis and treatment before birth. Regarding eugenics, he would support mild negative eugenics in severe cases, e.g., a child who will not survive or will endure extreme suffering throughout life, causing distress to the family. Conversely, the Buddha would never support positive eugenics, i.e., manipulating genetics with the illusory goal of changing human nature. This contradicts Buddhism's spirit of equality and the belief that only individuals can change themselves, with such change arising from within. Genocidal actions like those of the Nazi movement would never occur in Buddhism, a path founded on compassion and tolerance. Regarding genetic engineering, Buddhism would not oppose genetic modifications if they do not cause harm, are not driven by craving, and aim to treat diseases, alleviate suffering, and bring happiness to humans, and if possible, all beings. Buddhism does not advocate human cloning, knowing that all is impermanent, selfless and conditionally arisen. Experiments on humans and animals. Western medicine's significant advancements in understanding and treatment can be partly attributed to experimental methods introduced in the 19th century by physiologist Claude Bernard. According to him, experimental medicine operates scientifically rather than based on experience. One can only understand the laws and functions of living organisms by dissecting them to explore their internal environment. Instead of the ancient Hippocratic principle, primum non nocere, first, do no harm, he believed one has the right and duty to experiment on a human being whenever it can save lives, cure, or benefit that person. Regarding animal experimentation, Claude Bernard believed that it was humanity's absolute right and duty to experiment on animals before experimenting on humans. The aim was to master life and conquer nature for humanity. The key principle was not to harm others. Scientists only needed to consider the opinions of their peers and listen to their own conscience. It must be acknowledged that this path of experimental medicine has led to the development of biology and medicine up to the present day. The first decree on bioethics was published in 1931 by the German government, setting conditions for scientific experimentation on humans, prohibiting experiments in all cases without the subject's consent, avoiding human experimentation whenever animal experiments were possible, providing sufficient documentation on biological methods to explain and determine the experiment's value, prohibiting experiments on individuals under 18 years old and on those near death. Ironically, a few years later, 1939, Germany, under Nazi Hitler's regime, initiated an unprecedented program of genocide and experimentation on prisoners. In 1947, the Nuremberg Military Tribunal condemned these unlawful acts against humanity and established the Nuremberg Code, a 10-point set of guidelines for human experimentation. What stance can Buddhism take on experiments on humans and animals? Human experimentation. Buddhism respects human beings, life, and equality. Therefore, it aligns with conventional views that emphasize respect and protection for humans, and with laws such as the Nuremberg Code. Animal experimentation. Due to the spirit of compassion for all sentient beings, Buddhism cannot endorse the dissection and killing of animals indiscriminately and unhesitatingly, as often occurs in laboratories. From the overarching perspective of Buddhist cosmology, all creatures should be respected, viewed as one, without prioritizing humans over nature. However, in practice, it is challenging for humans not to leverage the advantages granted by nature. To fully respect life, as in Jainism, one would have to abandon experimental medicine on animals, allowing bacteria and parasites to multiply in the body without using antibiotics or disinfectants, making it impossible to treat many infectious diseases and epidemics that have plagued humanity for centuries. Whether we like it or not, humans will continue experimenting on animals and testing new drugs on animals before applying them to humans. This is unavoidable. What Buddhism can advocate is urging researchers to experiment on animals only when necessary, minimally, and strive to avoid causing harm and suffering to animals. Conclusion: as we have seen, Bioethical issues facing society are becoming increasingly diverse and complex. Moreover, they change with the pace of science, so rapidly that even governments and laws struggle to keep up. Bioethics is not something fixed, rooted in traditional moral principles, but rather viewpoints arising from collective, multidisciplinary reflections on the applications of biology and medicine, holding only relative value within a society in a certain period. The issue is how to reach a consensus, a compromise between science, ethics, and law, for a harmonious and beneficial societal development. Whether we like it or not, science continues to advance, increasingly influencing daily life. According to Francis Bacon, all that can be achieved will be achieved, suggesting that nothing can halt human progress, regardless of the outcomes or the individuals involved. Revealed religions, due to their rigid principles on life, often take an opposing stance, obstructing certain scientific applications in life and gradually impeding scientific progress. Consequently, their teachings may become sidelined in life, leading to division and confusion among followers. Buddhism differs from these religions, lacking rigid dogmas, absolute principles, and strict prohibitions. Although most bioethical issues were not addressed during the Buddhist time, we can infer from some fundamental Buddhist principles. Buddhism respects life but does not regard it as an absolute value. Buddhism is fundamentally a path to end suffering, with alleviating suffering as its sole purpose. Karma is created by one's intentions, not merely by any action. Unintentional harm does not generate harmful karma. The root of Buddhism lies in suffering. Like a lotus growing from the mud, Buddhism always connects with reality, no matter how unpleasant. With this foundation, we can believe that on most bioethical issues, Buddhism does not oppose scientific advancements and human societal choices up to the present day. Buddhism may advocate for pain relief, organ transplants, birth control, and prenatal diagnosis. Buddhism may accept euthanasia in exceptional cases, genetic engineering, and human experimentation under conditions. Buddhism does not advocate but can tolerate abortion and animal experimentation for the sake of alleviating suffering. These are some personal suggestions that need to be discussed and explored among Buddhists from various fields so that we can collectively build a bioethical foundation in the spirit of Buddhism and in tune with the times.